The emergency klaxons were wailing throughout Nexus Station, and if you've never heard a Rigelian panic siren, imagine a dying whale having an argument with a rusty gate. Ambassador Klexon, a 7-foot-tall creature that looked like someone had crossed a flamingo with a nervous accountant, was frantically adjusting his translator collar as he addressed the assembled Galactic Council. "Esteemed beings," Klexon squawked, his pink feathers ruffling with anxiety, "the situation has become, how do you humans say, completely screwed." The holographic display behind him showed a star map, peppered with red X marks, each one representing a world that had gone silent in the past month. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. "The Vortak Predator Pack has claimed 17 systems," Klexon continued, his voice cracking like a teenager asking someone to prom. "They're not conquering. They're not enslaving. They're hunting us for sport." Commander Thurok, a massive rhinoceros-like alien whose idea of diplomacy involved headbutting first and asking questions later, slammed his armored fist on the table. "My elite Corvan Battle Legion lasted exactly 4 minutes against them. 4 minutes. I've seen breakfast meetings last longer." The assembled aliens murmured in their various languages, which collectively sounded like a zoo having a mental breakdown. The Vortak were legendary nightmare fuel, 8-foot-tall apex predators with razor claws, electromagnetic vision, and a pack mentality that made wolves look like cuddly puppies. They'd been dormant in the Outer Rim for 3 centuries, but something had woken them up, and they were apparently working through the galactic phone book alphabetically. "We've exhausted all military options," Thurok growled, his horns scraping the ceiling as he stood. "The Zentorian Death Fleet? Wiped out. The Melkari Shadow Warriors? They didn't even slow them down. My own grandmother's knitting circle would have put up better resistance." Klexon nodded gravely, pulling up another hologram that showed casualty reports scrolling past like the world's most depressing stock ticker. "Which brings us to our final option, the one we all agreed we'd never consider." As a collective shudder ran through the assembly, even the plant-based delegates seemed to wilt slightly. "Surely you don't mean," wheezed Chancellor Gorvex, a blob-like creature whose species had evolved from particularly anxious pudding. "Yes," Klexon confirmed, his beak chattering with dread. "We're going to ask the humans for help." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop, assuming pins made sounds when dropped in the vacuum of space. Finally, a small voice from the back piped up. But they're so soft and squishy. They keep tiny predators as pets and feed them from cans. Their military strategy seems to involve pointing crude metal tubes at things and hoping for the best." Klexon sighed, a sound like air escaping from a sad balloon. "Yes, they're adorable in their primitive way, but they're also the only species that hasn't been contacted by the Vorthak yet. And frankly, we're out of options that don't involve mass extinction." Commander Thurok snorted. "What's the worst that could happen? They show up with their quaint projectile weapons and get eaten slightly more entertainingly than the rest of us?" "Message sent to Earth," announced the station's AI in a voice that suggested it was already updating its resume. "Human vessel responding. Estimated arrival, 2 hours." "Well," Klexon muttered, settling back into his perch, "I suppose we'll find out if humanity's legendary obliviousness to danger is stupidity or confidence." Outside the station's viewport, the stars looked a little dimmer, as if they were already mourning what was about to unfold. 2 hours later, the docking bay echoed with the unmistakable sound of a human spacecraft attempting to park, which is to say it sounded like a garbage disposal trying to mate with a chainsaw. The assembled diplomatic committee watched nervously as a battered ship that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard of aerodynamics but chose to ignore them entirely bumped against the docking clamps 3 times before finally settling into place. The airlock hissed open, and out stepped Captain Rex Murphy, a middle-aged human wearing what appeared to be a military uniform that had given up on military precision somewhere around the 3rd coffee stain. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen it all, done half of it, and found most of it disappointing. Tucked under his arm was a pet carrier that was gently vibrating with what sounded like a small engine running on idle. "Sorry I'm late," Murphy announced to the assembled aliens with the casual air of someone who'd just arrived at a barbecue instead of a galactic crisis. "Had to stop for gas, and Whiskers here needed his morning nap extended by about 3 hours. Ambassador Klexon approached cautiously, his neck extending like a periscope. "Captain Murphy, we appreciate your swift response to our emergency, though we are somewhat confused by your choice of companion." Murphy set down the carrier and unzipped it, revealing the largest, most aggressively orange tabby cat the galaxy had ever seen. Whiskers emerged with the unhurried dignity of a king who'd just woken up from a particularly satisfying dream about tuna. He was, to put it diplomatically, built like a furry ottoman with legs. "This is your secret weapon?" Commander Thurrock asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "It appears to be decorative." Whiskers yawned, displaying a pink tongue in the general enthusiasm of wet cardboard, then promptly flopped onto his side and began grooming his substantial belly. "Oh, Whiskers isn't a weapon," Murphy replied, scratching behind the cat's ears while the feline purred like a small aircraft engine. "He's just here for emotional support. You know, keep morale up during the inevitable carnage." "Inevitable carnage?" Klexon's feathers ruffled. "Captain, we brought you here because we hoped humans might have some unique defensive capabilities." Murphy snorted. "Unique? Sure, we've got that covered. Earth's got about 7 billion people, most of whom can't agree on pizza toppings, let alone military strategy. But hey, we're very good at making loud noises and running in circles when scared." Chancellor Gorvex oozed forward slightly. "But surely your species has some natural advantages, some hidden evolutionary gift." "Well," Murphy mused, "we're pretty good at destroying our own environment and arguing about fictional sports teams. Does that count?" The aliens exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both hope and profound regret simultaneously. Whiskers, meanwhile, had discovered a sunbeam streaming through the viewport and had repositioned himself to maximize lazy cat absorption. "Captain," Klexon tried again, "the Vorthak predator pack is approaching. They are the most feared hunters in known space. 8 feet tall, razor claws, pack tactics that would make your military theorists weep. They've eliminated every force we've sent against them." Murphy nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds rough. What's their ETA?" "Approximately 37 minutes, announced the station AI, which had apparently decided optimism was no longer part of its programming. "Perfect," Murphy said, settling into a nearby chair. "Just enough time for Whiskers to finish his pre-dinner nap. You guys wouldn't happen to have any coffee, would you? The good stuff, not that synthetic swill most species seem to prefer." As if on cue, the station's long-range sensors began beeping with incoming contacts. The main display lit up with formation markers that looked like a swarm of very angry, very organized death. "They're here," whispered Thurrock, his armor rattling as he backed toward the nearest exit. Murphy sipped the coffee someone had nervously provided and glanced at Whiskers, who was now sprawled across 3 chairs like an orange, furry throw pillow. "Yep," he said conversationally, "this should be interesting." The first thing anyone noticed about the Vorthak ships was that they didn't really look like ships at all. They looked like someone had taken the concept of nightmare and taught it basic aerospace engineering. Black, angular, and covered in what appeared to be decorative spikes that served no practical purpose except to make everyone who looked at them deeply uncomfortable. The lead vessel was twice the size of the others, broadcasting on all frequencies in a voice that sounded like gravel being fed through a blender full of broken glass. "Attention prey species of Nexus Station," came the transmission, and you could practically hear the saliva dripping. "I am Bloodfang Scrix, Alpha of the Vorthok Pack. We have come to hunt you for sport, as is our ancient right. Your terror will season our victory." Ambassador Klexon's translator was working overtime, but some things transcended language barriers, mainly the part where half the diplomatic corps immediately evacuated their various forms of bowels. "We offer you the honor of the hunt," Scrix continued, apparently enjoying himself. "Run, hide, fight. It matters not. We will track you through the corridors of your station like the soft, mewling prey you are. Your bones will decorate our dens, and your screams will be our lullabies." On the main viewer, the Vortek themselves became visible as they began boarding procedures. 8 feet of evolutionary nightmare, they moved with the fluid grace of apex predators who'd never encountered anything capable of challenging them. Their claws could slice through hull plating, their electromagnetic vision could see through most forms of concealment, and their pack-hunting instincts had been perfected over millions of years. "Oh, for crying out loud," Commander Thurrock muttered, already backing toward the emergency escape pods. "They're even uglier than the intelligence reports suggested. Look at those teeth! They've got teeth growing out of their teeth." The diplomatic corps was evacuating the docking bay with all the dignity of a fire drill at a clown college. Ambassador Klexon was frantically pressing buttons on what appeared to be every evacuation protocol the station had, plus a few he might have made up on the spot. "Captain Murphy," he squawked, "we must retreat to the secure bunkers immediately. The Vorthak will breach the docking bay in approximately 4 minutes. Murphy, meanwhile, had found a comfortable spot on a cargo container and was nursing his coffee while watching the evacuation with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly amusing documentary. Whiskers had somehow managed to climb onto Murphy's lap and was purring contentedly while the chaos unfolded around them. "Aren't you concerned?" Chancellor Gorvex asked, pausing in his hasty retreat. "The most feared predators in the galaxy are about to board this station." "Oh, I'm terrified," Murphy replied with the flat delivery of someone ordering toast. "Absolutely quaking in my boots. You can probably hear my knees knocking from there." The docking bay's blast doors began to glow red as the vortex started cutting through. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, if the chalkboard was made of screaming metal and the fingernails belonged to something that had crawled out of evolution's reject pile. "Final warning, humans," Scrix's voice boomed through the station's comm system. "We smell your fear. We taste your despair. Prepare to become the galaxy's most disappointing appetizer." Whiskers opened one green eye, regarded the glowing blast doors with the mild interest of someone checking the weather, then closed it again and resumed purring. "You should probably run now," Murphy mentioned conversationally to the remaining aliens, who were watching in fascination despite their terror. "Trust me on this one." The blast doors finally gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. The first Vorthak warrior stepped through, 9 feet of nightmare fuel with claws that gleamed like obsidian knives. Its head swiveled, electromagnetic vision scanning for prey, until it locked onto the human sitting calmly on the cargo container. "Found you," it growled in Galactic Standard, stalking forward with predatory grace. Murphy sighed and took another sip of coffee. "Whiskers, you might want to wake up now, we've got company." The cat opened both eyes this time, fixed them on the approaching Vorthak, and made a sound that was somewhere between a yawn and a purr. "Oh," Murphy added, almost as an afterthought, "you guys really shouldn't have woken him up from his nap." What happened next would later be described by xenobiologists as physically impossible, by military tacticians as strategically flawless, and by Ambassador Klexon as the reason I started drinking. Whiskers rose from Murphy's lap with the leisurely pace of a cat who had just remembered he'd left something important in another room. The orange tabby stretched, arching his back in that universally feline way that suggested the universe could wait while he worked out a kink in his spine. Then he turned his green eyes toward the approaching Vorthak warrior. And something fundamental shifted in the docking bay. The Vorthak, who had been stalking forward with the confidence of a predator who had never encountered anything higher on the food chain, suddenly stopped. Its electromagnetic vision was picking up readings that didn't make sense. The soft, round prey animal was registering as something else entirely. "Murphy," whispered Chancellor Gorvex, who hadn't quite made it to the escape pods, "is your pet supposed to be glowing?" "Glowing?" Murphy glanced down at Whiskers, who was indeed emanating a faint shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. "Oh, that's just his murder mode kicking in, perfectly normal. You should see him when someone tries to give him a bath." The first Vorthak warrior took another step forward, claws extended, and made what would later be recorded as the last sound it ever produced. It was somewhere between a roar and a question mark. Whiskers moved. To say he was fast would be like saying black holes are somewhat dense. One moment he was sitting on the cargo container looking like a furry throw pillow with attitude problems. The next moment he was simply elsewhere, and the 9-foot killing machine was collapsing to the deck with a confused expression and several new ventilation holes. "Ha!" Murphy observed, as if commenting on the weather. "He's using the quiet approach today. Usually there's more screaming involved." More Vorthak poured through the breach, their pack instincts kicking in as they detected the demise of their point warrior. They moved with coordinated precision, fanning out to surround their target, electromagnetic vision tracking every possible hiding spot. Whiskers was nowhere to be seen. "Where did it go?" snarled the second warrior, scanning frantically. "The prey animal has vanished." "Check the thermal readings," ordered a third. Nothing that soft could have moved that fast. That's when they heard it. A sound that had been refined over millions of years of evolution, designed specifically to freeze prey in place while death approached on silent pause. A sound that every creature in the galaxy instinctively feared, even if they'd never heard it before. Purring. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in their bones. The Vorthak, apex predators who had never known fear, suddenly discovered what their prey felt like in those final moments before the hunt ended. "Above you," Murphy called out helpfully to the increasingly panicked warriors. "No, wait, behind you. Actually, I think he's everywhere at once. Cats are funny that way." The third Vorthak spun around just in time to see two green eyes floating in what appeared to be empty air. Then there was a brief, wet sound, and another legendary predator discovered the harsh reality of suddenly being demoted to the middle of the food chain. Ambassador Klexon, who had been cowering behind an overturned table, poked his head up to witness the impossible. The remaining Vorthak were backing toward the breach they'd cut, their formation dissolving into something that looked suspiciously like panic. "This is not possible," one of them hissed. "We are apex predators. We are the hunters. We do not flee from prey." Whiskers materialized on top of a shipping crate, 20 feet from his last known position, licking his paw with the casual air of someone who'd just finished a light snack. His purring had taken on a decidedly smug quality. "Oh, you're not fleeing from prey," Murphy corrected, finishing his coffee and setting the cup aside. "You're being hunted by a predator. There's a difference. Whiskers here's what we call a house cat. They're descended from desert ambush predators who were so efficient at killing things that we decided to domesticate them for pest control." The surviving Vortak stared at the orange tabby, who had resumed grooming himself as if 9-foot alien nightmares were beneath his notice. "We'll see about that," growled the largest remaining warrior, and made the tactical error of charging directly at what appeared to be a lazy house pet. "Oh dear," Murphy sighed. "Whiskers really doesn't like it when people run at him. Fair warning." The warning came approximately 3 seconds too late. What followed could only be described as a masterclass in the art of violence, delivered by a professor who had tenure in the field of making things dead. Whiskers transformed from a lazy house cat into something that would have made evolution itself file a formal complaint about false advertising. The charging Vorthak warrior, all 9 feet and 800 pounds of bioengineered nightmare, suddenly found himself experiencing what could charitably be called a learning opportunity. Whiskers didn't dodge, didn't flee, didn't even seem particularly concerned. Instead, he simply wasn't there anymore when the claws arrived, having apparently relocated to a spot that coincided perfectly with the warrior's jugular. "You know," Murphy commented conversationally as the massive alien hit the deck with a sound like a sack of wet cement. "Back on Earth, Whiskers once killed a raccoon that was twice his size. We thought that was impressive until we learned he'd been letting it think it was winning for about 20 minutes first. Cats have a sense of drama." The old Brapio Vartslo. The remaining Vorthak pack was discovering that their legendary pack tactics were somewhat less effective when the prey could apparently teleport. Whiskers had returned to being visible, sitting primly on his cargo container, but the psychological damage was already done. These were creatures who had spent millions of years at the top of the food chain, and suddenly finding themselves being hunted was causing what their military psychologists would later classify as aggressive cognitive dissonance. "Regroup," barked the pack leader, trying to salvage some tactical cohesion. "Form a defensive circle. Watch all approaches." Whiskers tilted his head with the expression of someone listening to a particularly amusing joke. Then he began to move through the docking bay with the fluid grace of liquid death, wearing an orange fur coat. He wasn't running or leaping or doing anything that looked particularly athletic. He was just flowing, like smoke with an attitude problem and excellent reflexes. "There," shouted one warrior, pointing at what appeared to be empty air. "It's there." "No," corrected another, spinning frantically. "It's behind us." "Above," hissed a third, just before discovering that being right wasn't necessarily better than being wrong. Murphy had pulled out what appeared to be a handheld device and was providing running commentary like a nature documentary narrator who'd had too much coffee. "And here we see the common house cat displaying what we call murder zoomies. Note the precision of movement, the economy of effort, and the complete absence of anything resembling mercy." Ambassador Klexon had emerged from his hiding spot and was watching with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a traffic accident between physics and common sense. "Captain Murphy, is this normal behavior for Earth cats?" "Oh, completely normal," Murphy replied, recording video as Whiskers performed what could only be described as a ballet of violence. "This is actually pretty restrained for him. He's not even playing with them yet. When he starts playing, that's when things get really entertaining." As if summoned by Murphy's words, Whiskers paused in his systematic dismantling of the Vorthak pack to look directly at his human. There was something distinctly mischievous in those green eyes. "Oh no," Murphy muttered. "He heard me." What happened next would later be studied by military academies across the galaxy under the classification Psychological Warfare Advanced Techniques. Whiskers didn't kill the remaining warriors. Instead, he began to play with them. Not the gentle, loving play of a pet with its owner, but the terrible play of an apex predator with prey that had ceased to pose any meaningful threat. He would appear just long enough for them to spot him, let them charge, then vanish at the last possible second. He would hum, batting at their ankles like they were particularly large and aggressive toys. At one point, he actually climbed onto the back of the largest warrior and began kneading his shoulders with his claws, purring loudly while the vortex spun in confused circles trying to dislodge him. "This is humiliating," growled one of the survivors, his electromagnetic vision spinning wildly as he tried to track a target that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "This is impossible," corrected another, just before Whiskers decided the entertainment value had run its course and efficiently demonstrated why Earth cats were responsible for the extinction of dozens of bird species. By the time Bloodfang Scrix himself finally made his entrance, stepping through the breach with all the dramatic flair of someone who expected to find his warriors standing over piles of prey remains, the docking bay had taken on an entirely different atmosphere. It was very quiet, very clean, and contained one human drinking coffee, one orange cat grooming his paws, and a scattered collection of alien diplomats who were questioning everything they thought they knew about predator and prey relationships. "Where is my pack?" Scrix demanded, his voice echoing off the walls with considerably less confidence than his initial broadcast had suggested. Murphy looked up from his coffee. "Oh, they're around. Whiskers was just introducing himself. He's very social that way." Scrix's electromagnetic vision swept the bay, picking up the heat signatures of his fallen warriors and one very smug cat who was regarding him with the patient interest of someone waiting for the punchline of a particularly good joke. "Impossible," Scrix snarled. "I am the apex predator of this galaxy. I have hunted across 1,000 worlds. I am death incarnate." Whiskers yawned, displaying his pink tongue and a complete lack of concern for galactic reputations. "Yeah, well," Murphy said, standing up and dusting off his uniform. "You probably shouldn't have woken him up from his nap. He gets cranky when his sleep schedule gets disrupted." The final confrontation lasted exactly 47 seconds. Which was generous considering Whiskers spent the first 30 seconds of it sitting perfectly still and letting Bloodfang Scrix work himself into what could only be described as an impotent rage. When he finally moved, it was with the casual efficiency of someone taking out the trash. Bloodfang Scrix, the terror of 17 star systems, found himself flat on his back with 20 pounds of orange fury sitting on his chest, purring like a small engine while rhythmically kneading his armor with claws that had somehow found their way through gaps that the manufacturer had sworn were impossible to exploit. "Good boy, Whiskers," Murphy said, scratching behind the cat's ears while Scrix struggled ineffectually beneath him. "Who's the apex predator?" "Yes, you are. Yes, you are!" Whiskers purred louder and began the process of making biscuits on the defeated alien's chest plate, which was creating small but persistent dents in what had previously been considered impenetrable armor. The silence in the docking bay stretched on for what felt like several geological epochs, broken only by the rhythmic purring of one very satisfied cat, and the occasional metallic ping as Whiskers continued his enthusiastic biscuit-making session on Bloodfang Scrix's chest armor. The legendary terror of 17 star systems had been reduced to a whimpering pile of defeated predator beneath 20 pounds of orange fur and attitude. Ambassador Klexon was the first to find his voice, though it came out as more of a strangled whisper. "Captain Murphy, I feel compelled to ask, how many creatures like Whiskers does Earth possess?" Murphy scratched his chin thoughtfully, as if calculating the population of deadly household pets was something he did on a regular Tuesday. "Well, let's see. Last census put us at around 600 million house cats, give or take a few million strays. Then there's the big cats, the medium cats, the wild cats, and the cats that technically aren't cats but still have that whole 'I will end you' attitude." The remaining members of the diplomatic corps who had emerged from their various hiding spots like prairie dogs after a thunderstorm absorbed this information with the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. 600 million. Repeated Chancellor Gorvex, his gelatinous form quivering with what might have been awe or terror. 600 million apex predators that you keep as pets? "Oh, they're not pets," Murphy corrected with a laugh. "They're housemates. We feed them, they let us live in their territory. It's a pretty good arrangement, all things considered, though the litter box situation can get complicated." Commander Turek, who had been conspicuously absent during the actual fighting but had somehow materialized again now that the danger had passed, stepped forward with the cautious air of someone approaching a live bomb. "Captain, Are you telling us that your species cohabits with predators capable of this? He gestured vaguely at the carnage-free but thoroughly dominated docking bay, where Whiskers was now grooming himself while using Bloodfang's Scrix as a particularly uncomfortable chair. The Vorthak leader was making small, whimpering sounds and had apparently given up any pretense of dignity in favor of remaining very, very still. Cohabits is putting it nicely, Murphy admitted. Really, we're their staff. They've trained us to open cans, provide climate-controlled housing, and clean up after them. In exchange, they occasionally purr, and sometimes bring us dead things as presents. It's a classic symbiotic relationship. Ambassador Klexon's neck extended to its full length as he processed this information. And the larger cats you mentioned? Tigers, lions, leopards, jaguars, cougars, lynx. Murphy began counting on his fingers. Oh, and we've got some that aren't technically cats but have the same basic programming. Wolverines, honey badgers, that sort of thing. Nature got really creative with the whole small furry and absolutely lethal concept. The diplomatic corps exchanged looks that conveyed volumes of interspecies communication, most of which seemed to center around the theme of, we have made a terrible mistake in our understanding of humans. Captain Murphy, Klexon said carefully, when we contacted Earth about the Vorthak threat, we were under the impression that humans were a peaceful species. Your entertainment broadcasts suggest you spend most of your time consuming fermented plant matter and arguing about which group of individuals can move a spherical object across a field most effectively. Oh, we are peaceful, Murphy assured them. We love peace. We'll fight anyone who threatens our peace. It's kind of our thing. Whiskers chose this moment to emit a particularly loud purr and stretch, extending his claws just enough to create interesting new ventilation holes in Scrix's armor. The defeated Vorthak leader made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and an apology to whatever gods might be listening. The question now, Murphy continued, is what you want to do about the rest of Scrix's fleet. Last I checked, there are about 30 Vorthak ships out there, probably wondering why their fearless leader hasn't reported back. As if summoned by Murphy's words, the communication system crackled to life with increasingly frantic calls from the Vorthak fleet. Alpha Scrix, report. Alpha Scrix, status report. Alpha Scrix, we're picking up unusual readings from the station. Murphy looked down at Whiskers, who had finished grooming and was now regarding the communication panel with the speculative interest of a cat who had just discovered a new toy. What do you think, buddy? Should we tell them their boss is currently serving as your personal furniture? Whiskers meowed once, a sound that somehow managed to convey both satisfaction and the promise of future violence. Right then, Murphy said, keying the comm. Attention Vorthak fleet, this is Captain Murphy of Earth. Your Alpha is currently indisposed. He's discovered the joys of being a cat bed and seems to be enjoying the experience. We're prepared to discuss terms for his release. The response was immediate and predictably outraged. Impossible. No prey species could defeat Alpha Scrix. This is some form of trickery. Hold on, Murphy replied, then looked down at his feline companion. Whiskers, could you provide some proof of concept for the nice aliens? Whiskers looked up at Murphy, then at the communication panel, then back at Scrix. With the deliberate precision of a surgeon, or a particularly vindictive furry dictator, he extended one claw and gently pressed it against Scrix's throat. The resulting sound was like a tea kettle having an existential crisis. The comm channel went very, very quiet. Now then, Murphy continued conversationally, I believe we were discussing terms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack up your little hunting expedition and head back to whatever corner of the galaxy you crawled out of. You're going to spread the word that Earth is off limits, and if anyone asks why, you're going to explain that we keep apex predators as housemates and they don't appreciate their nap time being interrupted. Ambassador Klexon had pulled out what appeared to be an official-looking tablet and was frantically typing. Captain Murphy, the Galactic Council would like to formally propose immediate recognition of Earth as a restricted zone. Full sovereignty, no interference protocols, and a very large do not disturb sign. Sounds reasonable, Murphy agreed. But I think you should probably make it a galaxy-wide announcement, just to be safe. Whiskers purred his approval and settled more comfortably onto his defeated throne, apparently planning to use Bloodfang's Scrix as furniture for the foreseeable future. The terror of 17 star systems had been reduced to a very expensive, very uncomfortable cat bed, and judging by his expression, he was beginning to accept this as his new station in life. A more question, Captain, Klexon ventured, his voice still slightly shaky. How exactly did your species manage to domesticate creatures capable of this? Murphy grinned and gave Whiskers another scratch behind the ears, which prompted even louder purring. We didn't domesticate them, Ambassador. They domesticated us. We just haven't figured that out yet. Outside the viewport, the Vorthak fleet was already powering down weapons and preparing to jump to hyperspace, apparently having decided that discretion was the better part of not being turned into cat toys. Well, Murphy said, settling back into his chair while Whiskers continued his victory grooming session, I'd say this mission was a complete success. Whiskers gets a new chair, the galaxy gets some peace and quiet, and I get to finish my coffee while it's still warm. Everybody wins. Except, of course, for Bloodfang Scrix, who was learning the hard way that being the apex predator was a title that came with no warranty and was apparently transferable to whoever had the better reflexes and the more impressive prerogative. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.